So I was out running with a training partner, Andrew Davidson, great guy, and I just rolled my ankle over nothing, and it just wouldn't heal from there. It wouldn't heal. So I thought, I'm going to go overseas and just get better, just have a break from running. So I had to let go of the New Zealand champs that year. And that 2011 year, I'd run the fastest time, 800 metre time. I actually had the number one ranking in New Zealand because Glenn Bellum ran the fastest, but he was a junior, so I had the senior. It only lasted for 6 weeks, but I was on top of my game and I knew the form that I was in. And I was devastated at the fact that I couldn't go to the New Zealand champs that year because I knew I could have won gold that year. That's just what I felt. And so I went back home to Greymouth. I competed in a bike race around Brunner. It's a 136k bike race, and during this bike race, I was up with the leaders for about a third of the race, and then I just fell back, and I was just biking, then I collapsed off my bike, and I was like, well, what the heck's going on? Wheeled myself up to Lake Brunner, went in, got a Coke and a Snickers bar, and I thought I'm just low on blood sugar. Sat there for 20 minutes, and I'm just saying, get on that fucking bike and finish this fucking race. Just get it done. And I'm dying, and it was another 42k to go. So I'm breaking off the pieces bit by bit because I know the area. And I finished the line. I said, I'm never riding a bloody bike again. And I sleep for a week. I'm having night sweats, hallucinations, all this stuff. And I've gone to the doctors in this time, but they never took bloods. They just gave me some antibiotics and a prescription for that. And I woke up one morning. I had this massive swollen eye, and I collapsed at the sink. And my brother was there. He picked me up. He rang up my auntie. He goes, get him up to the hospital. Went up to the hospital, and I remember being up there with Mum when she came, and I was crying. I was like, something's not right. Something's not right. Something's not right. But still, they were trying to drain this eye, and they hadn't taken bloods, and were like, take some bloods. And they admitted me for the night. Finally, they'd taken the bloods, and then I was about to fly out 2 days to Thailand with my mates, and they came in. I'm saying, I can't go, I'll be a bit later. But then during that time when Nath was there, my family were there, they were getting caught up. I saw this look on their face, and this doctor came in, he was a professor, and then he gave me the diagnosis that I had leukemia. And my mum just cried hysterically, and I was like, what have I done? That was my instant thought, what have I done? I didn't know what leukemia was. It sounds like a horrendous word when you look at it in the letters. Had no idea what it was, but it was a cancer of the blood, and I just seen the distraught on my family's face, and I'm so confused. What is this? And he goes, you're going to have to go over to Christchurch to the bone marrow unit to get specialised treatment. It's probably going to be about 7 to 8 months, a long time. I was like, what? So in that moment, I was so confused in what was going on. I didn't even understand cancer. For me, when you hear the word cancer at that time, at 23, it was a death sentence. And leukemia was something completely new, but seeing the look on my family's face, that cut me up more. So that's when I just shut the door. Yeah, pushed them away. So that's the lead up into that cancer diagnosis.
I've been on the other side, again, to draw from personal experience. I've been in the room when a doctor tells a loved one that they have cancer, and it is, it's like the oxygen just goes out, and exactly what you've said. It's like, oh my God, that's it. Having pushed people away, did you then seek to backfill that knowledge gap to try and understand what you had, or did you just think, I'll hunker down and just deal with whatever comes?
No, good question. Yeah. So, as you say, the distance. When that diagnosis, I had an old guy across the road that they didn't do a very professional job of telling me what I had, and he's like, my mate died from that. I'm like, huh? But yeah, so I went into pushing them away, but I like to know. I like to know information and want them talking about what I've got. So I bought these books and understood leukemia and learning all this new terminology and the immune system and stuff like that. I wanted to know, and probably dug in a bit too much and put myself in a position like, holy shit, this is really, really, really serious. And the doctors were giving me great information, but it wasn't in the in-depth what I was learning in books. But hey, books are on a whole different scale. They don't look at me as an individual, and that's what my doctor was really good at, looking at me as a person. Peter Ganley, fantastic guy. He'd always say, hey, you've been a great runner. That's the foundation that you set, that you're going to get through this, and he always looked at the positive. He was a great doctor. But yeah, I dug in deep trying to research of what was going on in my blood, and I ended up having a very, very poor prognosis with numerous genetic mutations, which put me in this poor category.
Can you tell us about the chemo journey?
Yeah. Yeah, I never experienced chemo before, but there was a guy at work who'd come in after my family. He had gone through it, and I asked him what it was about, but he had a different cancer, and he gave me a brief description, but leukemia is completely different. So I'm in an isolation room with a double ventricle door, air pressure room. So it's an isolation room, little tiny room, about half the size of this room. And the chemo itself, the first round was horrendous. I was used to pain, good pain, running on hills. Love that pain, as we spoke about before, Shay. But this was a different pain. My stomach lining got stripped away and my stomach shrunk to the size of a walnut, and it was the first time I was on morphine, having boluses of morphine. I just haven't felt that pain before. I didn't know when it would end, and it just stripped me apart. My hair was falling out and all that stuff. And I remember Carol, she was retiring, and she's coming in with these boluses of morphine, injecting them into my stomach. I was like, fuck off, I don't want your bloody morphine, just leave it, I'll do it myself. And she's like, well, left me to it, and I was like, holy shit, what did I just say to her? And she was retiring that week, so I wrote her a letter and gave her some chocolate. Someone gave me, I was so sorry about that. And she said, don't worry, love, I've had a lot worse than that. And I thought, wow, what goes on in these rooms? Yeah. So the pain was tough in that first round.
It's impossible to know. It's a hard story to retell, but it's very important too. Even just that, you just don't get a picture of exactly how hard it is. But the reason that the importance of sharing your journey is to talk about rock bottom and when things got to their worst because of where you've got to and how you dealt with it. And so with that in mind, I was wondering if you could talk to the experience of when you were at your lowest.
Yeah, definitely. Brings good context to the story. So I had about 2 to 3 months of treatment, just this physical pain, spewing up, shitting myself, all this different pains that's hard to describe. But there was a mental pain lingering, and that was not being able to communicate, bottling everything up, pushing everyone away. I mentioned earlier I spoke to a few good friends like Ruth, but not really telling them what was going on. It's always like, no, I'm good, but the physical pain's really getting to me, and da-da-da. So it was 3 months, and during my treatment, you'd be a month in hospital, have your chemo, you wait till your neutrophils come back, and then you get out for 2 weeks. I was staying at this place called Ranui House, an amazing place. Month in, then 2 weeks out, and after the third round I was out, and I pushed my mum away, said, go home, I can't have you here. But she came back, so she's gone out this day to go get some groceries, and this pain in my head, like all that value and all that worth of my hard work and running, that's where I thought my life was, and I thought I had nothing left. You're weak, you're losing. It was just building up. It just cascaded. You're nothing, and then it's like, you're fucking nothing. It's just bang, 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 and I didn't know how to deal with it, and I thought, I've just got to end it. And it's hard to talk about, but I have to talk about it, and I always get quite emotional. So in that moment, I walked to the balcony. I used to work at heights, and I thought, let's jump. You know how to do this. And I was on the 5th level, and I was up there, and I thought, this is it. You can end this. You can get this pain. You can control this. This is your way of controlling it. Step over 1 foot, and I feel this gust of wind, and whatever you want to call it, and I turn around. I see my mum's cup of tea there, and I just feel her love come to me, and I say to myself, you can't put this pain that you're feeling inside your mum, imagine. It came to me, her love, and it pulled me back. It just pulled me back, and I sat down, and I had my bald head, and I've just got my fingernails in my head just screaming like, what's going on? and I had to figure something out, so I took 2 Zopiclone pills, went to bed. Mum didn't even know what happened, went to sleep, and the next morning the canteen coordinator was coming around for that 3-month period and offering me stuff, and I always say no, and I knew they offered counselling, and this was me using my strength at that time. I recognised I needed help. I had a weakness, not being able to talk, and I needed to understand what was going on. And so I rang her up. Her name was Sarah, lovely lady. She organised counselling in the space of 2 days, and that unfolded my path of being able to communicate and understand what was going on. And he gave me some great tools, and it was just a fantastic thing to do.
So is it as linear as that was rock bottom? That was the hardest moment, and you came back, and then you sought counselling, and that's the beginning of the path to the Josh that you are today?
It was a start for sure. It was a start, but there were harder times to come, and I did feel suicidal throughout the journey, but I've gathered some tools to be able to mitigate those thoughts, to push them away. And to be fair, they still come now some days. My body's not perfect. I cramp up at night and you have these thoughts, but I've got the ability now to recognise, create that space and push it away. So this was the journey of learning that 10-year period. So this was the start. And he'd take me in, we'd have a conversation. Our first conversation was about my childhood, and I'm like, why are we talking about my childhood when I've got cancer? But it portrayed a bigger picture of what was going on, how my identity was caught up in running and hard work. It was like, no, there's more to you than just that. That was just a part of your life. So it's separating the two. It wasn't me, Josh Komen, that wanted to die. It was just this pain and the situation that I was in that wanted to die. And I had to separate the two. And he gave me some great books to read, and I started reading books, and I started journaling a lot, going back to my diary writing. Then I went into visualization. I didn't really know much about meditation back then, but I kind of was doing it, just visualizing, because I used to do it in my running. So I was just visualizing myself, getting out of hospital, back on the Paparoas, into the surf, doing things like that. And I started writing a few goals out of what I wanted to do. And I'd write a heap out, then I'd cross them off and eliminate them to about 2 or 3. And I focused on those 3 things. And I used to look out my window and watch the trees and pretend I was part of the tree, and kind of just taking myself internally to externally. And then I started talking, talking to my dad, talking to my mum, talking to people I trusted. I didn't tell everybody what was going on inside, but talking to Ruth more openly. My mate Hamish, he'd come over and he'd just sit next to me and we'd have a chat, and I'd be open and honest with these people, of what was going on. And they never had answers. They just listened. That's all it was. And it just helped take that allostatic load, that total stress load off my shoulders, to help me go forward with a lot more clarity. But also too, I read a book by Viktor Frankl. And I've still got this book. It's next to my bedside shelf. And Man's Search for Meaning. Fantastic book. And basically the crux of it was like, you've got to find meaning within your suffering. Just a backstory about Viktor Frankl. He was in Auschwitz and Dachau for X amount of time. And, he suffered a lot. And he voluntarily put himself in Auschwitz at the start. He had the opportunity to get out of Austria, but he stayed with his mother and father, went into these prisoner of war camps and got through, and he's made up this thing called logotherapy, which means meaning therapy, finding meaning within your suffering, finding purpose. And there was a quote in there too I really liked. It's like, when we're no longer able to change a situation, we're forced to change ourselves. So I had to change myself. And I really love that book, and I admire that man. I find him a close friend in a way, because I've read his book that much. So these little things really helped me go forward. So that was the start of the journey, Steve, yeah.
Second time in a few episodes that Man's Search for Meaning has been referenced on the pod. Russell Packer, who we had on recently as well, spoke about it as well, and the impact that it had during his time in jail around choice and the choices that you make.
Yeah.
It's
the last of the human freedoms. Yeah. It's a choice. Conscious choice that we can make. And he spoke about that in his book. When everything's stripped away, down to your bare nudity, you still have a conscious choice to choose one's way. So I made a choice and a promise to myself, no matter how hard it got, I'm not going to take my life. And that was the promise I wrote down in my diary. No matter how hard it got, I'm not going to take my life. And I wrote that numerous times, and that was my promise.
70 times?
70 times.
A day?
70 times a day for 7 days.
Like you've packaged up the learnings really well. How long was that process of the first conversation to, I guess, being open and honest with your family? Can you timeline that?
In particular with my dad, it was kind of straight away, because he come into my room one day and I was in immense pain, and he started crying, and I hadn't seen my dad cry. And I was like, my dad loves me. He's been watching me. And then we started talking, we started talking genuinely for the first time. I understood his childhood, and we got to know one another, and that was big for me. And that was what David Gard, the counsellor, he's like, you got to start chatting to your dad. And yeah, that was huge for me, being able to connect with my father. Yeah.
After these tools you've got, and you're working your way, and you start to turn a corner, and you beat this thing. So we're on the way out of it.
Yep.
How much of a role did humour play in your rehab? How important was humour?
Yeah, it was so good. My uncle Kev, he's great. He always used to say, if you're not laughing, you're dying. So, yeah, I used to, on the cards when I said thank you to the nurses, I could see their shoes because I'm lying on the bed and the first thing I'd see was their shoes. So I'd say thank you and I'd write their shoe on there and they'd always laugh. The nurses were fantastic. I mean, Seamus, you might have seen the nurses in action and they were great. They were always trying to give me a laugh. And my dad was funny and he was always giving me a laugh too. You know, one incident with Dad, he wrote my car was for sale and put it outside in a public space in Christchurch, and I was getting all these random phone calls. It was an old car. and one guy rings up, he's like, oh, I'll swap you some pink slips for your car and all this stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? And Pete comes in, he's like, oh, did you get some phone calls? Did you get some phone calls? I'm like, you bastard. Yeah, so little laughs like that, you know, sustain me. It was just, yeah.
It's an absolute roller coaster, isn't it?
It is.
That period or that cancer journey for everybody involved. But you're right in terms of laughter and lightening things up.
Yeah.
It's critical in terms of the human kind of journey.
Oh, we're meant to be connected, you know, and that's when I talk about, I do a lot of talks and workshops, you know, the foundation of health is connection. When we talk about laughter, we'll open up that dopaminergic pathway. We're releasing dopamine, which has an essential effect on the immune system as well. So we've got this feel-good molecule about us, but just by laughing. And it, you know,
there's a dark humour story coming up, I think, as well, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this one will have ever come up at one of your talks, but I've been on the phone with your mate Ben, he's given me so much gold. And one of them was about, you know, part of this journey is if you wanted kids down the line, you had to put some you had to put some specimens aside in case that was coming down the track. Yeah. And he retold, I was wondering if you had a version of it, your experience producing that.
Yeah, just a bit of a backstory on Ben first, because he's been a bit of inspiration in my life as well. He's been through his own ordeals. So you know, when the mitochondria produces ATP, adenosine triphosphate.
I'm nodding my head like I know what you mean, but
yeah.
I'll go back and actually research what you're talking about.
So he's producing this thing called KTP. It's crazy. It stands for Kleenex tissue papers. And that was a genetic mutation from a severe disease that lasted like 4 or 5 years, still lingering from man flu. Really? Yeah. So he's a huge inspiration, going through what I went through. Yeah. So thanks, Ben. Still lingering a bit. If you go around to his house, there's a few KTP lying around, a few tissue paper.
I like the slow.
Yeah, it took me a while on the slow hit, and then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. We're going after Ben.
Yeah. So he's stitching me up here. Yeah. So I got diagnosed. You're going through all this confusion. You're talking about chemo and you're learning about the immune system and all this stuff, and what's going on? Then they come in with this cup, like, oh, you got to take a sample. I'm like, I've already taken a blood sample. You know, it's done. No. You got to take a sample of your semen, your sperm. You got to make a collection. You might not be able to kids. It's going to fry your testicles and all that. I'm like, fuck, this is the last thing I want to do. You know. So they give me a magazine. I don't have a smartphone. You know, magazine. I have to go to these toilets that just reek. You know, they haven't been cleaned. Oh man, this is going to be dreadful. And I'm like, literally going, yeah, okay, go. And then I start to get woozy, you know, I'm like, oh, I've got to get this done, you know, this is important, got to get this done. So you're going back and forth. And you're trying to get this thing done. And then the climax comes, and I'm leaning over, I miss half of it, and I'm like grabbing the pipe to try and pull it into the car. Oh. I'm like, shivers, I'm never going to be able to have kids. This sample's terrible. And I go back and I'm like, lie on my bed, but I can't believe we brought that story up. But yeah.
His telling us it was ask him about the worst wank of his life.
The saddest wank.
That was the saddest wank of my life for sure. It was dreadful. The toilets weren't cleaned. It was the last thing I wanted to do.
And I had with your own mortality. Yeah, just like, what is going on?
This
is not what I want to be doing.
Scrape the little dregs off the side into...
Literally. Yeah. Into the cup.
Yeah.
You're pulling the pipe hard, just pushing everything in there. Oh, yeah. The worst. Yeah.
Yeah.
But nobody tells you about that.
No.
Nobody speaks about that.
I was not prepared for that at all. It was
Right.
about chemo, it was about cancer, it was about diagnosis, about prognosis, all that, and then all of a sudden you got to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we had the opposite. We had Rebecca Stott on recently, football fern who's played in the Women's World Cup. Same thing. She had her own cancer journey, came back, is now playing international football, but soon after she started, IVF. And I fucking had genuinely no idea. So I think these kind of conversations are great in terms of informing people what they might be in for should the unfortunate happen to them, because they're realities of the situation.
Correct. Store up the wank bank.
Imagine, just for a second, if you had passed out during the act and someone had to come into the bathrooms and find you.
No, that's what I nearly did.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Imagine that.
Yeah, trowel around ankle, stick mag on the side, just a grim, dirty
cup upside down.
cup. Oh,
I'm not sure how many other podcasts go from suicidal thoughts to wanking stories in the space of a few sentences, but I think we managed to get it to work.
Just for the audience, the wanking story came first before the suicidal.
Oh, okay, good to know. Yeah, important to get that timeline around the right way.